Hey, it's Chris here, also known as the Artist Manifest. I'm a full-time rock and hip-hop artist with about 500,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, and I want to share with you the story on how I got signed to a record deal at 25 years old. I had recently been married, and I had a full-time networking job doing computers at this construction company, and so I was fixing computers by day, and I was writing rhymes and going to open mics at night. I lived in Toronto at the time, and so we'd go downtown, we'd play shows, I'd travel all over Canada playing shows on the weekends and whatnot, but I always had a desire to do music full time. And so we heard about these different showcases and label opportunities and whatnot, so I would send out demos. And I remember actually going to Nashville, driving 16 hours to play this showcase where I thought, like, this is it, I'm gonna get signed. But there were so many artists on this showcase. By the time I got on, there was like no one there. I played for 5 people: my girlfriend, my 2 friends, and the sound engineer. All right, it was embarrassing. And what's sad was it was packed earlier in the night, but they just kept on putting other guys on and other guys on. And then it slowly, by the time I played, it was like 1 a.m. And then I got this really dope opportunity to open up for this band called 1,000 Foot Krutch back in Ontario, Canada. And so I went and opened for them, and it was a really dope show. And I ended up meeting the lead singer. And instead of looking at him as a competitor, I became friends. And we ended up hitting it off. And I remember he ended up signing to this label called Tooth and Nail Records out of Seattle, Washington, and he was sharing how well it was going, and so he wanted to help me get signed. And what's really wild was we ended up setting up a showcase in Ontario, Canada. And so this president of this label ends up, instead of me going to him, he comes over all the way to see me perform. And what's really dope is before the show, and there was 2 artists on the bill, there's this punk band that was playing, and then there was me. And what's really cool is we hit it off before the show. He was asking me questions, we were talking, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've already met the president, this is so cool. But unfortunately, this is where I made the big mistake. After we crushed the show, my hip hop friends and producers and whatnot wanted to meet the president. So next thing you know, I'm in this room with the president, Trevor, who is helping me to get signed, and all my hip hop homies. And they start shooting their mouths off and basically say a whole bunch of things that offend the president. And so that whole deal and everything fell apart. And I'll never forget getting the call from my buddy Trevor. Who was like, dude, you really embarrassed me. You screwed this thing up, man. I'm sorry. And I'll never forget crying. I'll never forget getting shingles because I was working 2 jobs. I was practicing every night for the show. So I ended up getting shingles for a time. And I was just ready to just say, forget it. I don't need to do this. But if you're like me, you've got music in your blood, and this isn't just a career, it's a calling, right? You feel called to do music. And so I finished the album anyways, put it out as an independent artist, and I remember hanging out with Trevor, playing it for him, and he's like, you know what, for some crazy reason, I'm going to give you another shot. And so he ends up playing it for the president again. And I'll never forget being in my condo and all of a sudden getting the phone call from the president. He's like, okay, we'll do a deal with you, but it's going to be a licensing deal. And I didn't even know what a licensing deal meant, but basically it meant that they would have rights to sell my album for 7 years. I'd keep my publishing and everything, but I'd actually get my masters back, which I didn't realize actually how good that was for me. But how they were thinking was, well, you're just another one of these annoying hip hop artists. You're just going to cause us trouble like you did in the meeting. But I'm basically doing a favor for Trevor. I want to sign you anyways, and you can go through our distribution system, because at the time they had distribution through EMI, which was Universal, which at the time, distribution was everything, getting your CDs in the stores, getting it out there, right? Using their radio team. But here's the catch. I didn't get it in advance. There was no advance, man. It was just look, you're getting our team. We're going to put this out for you, but you got to kind of prove to us. We're going to sign you for 3 records, right? And so I'm stoked to the moon. We freaking signed this deal. And I think for some reason that signing a record deal means I got to quit my job. The label didn't tell me to quit my job, but I was like, no, I got to go full time. I'm signed. I'm going to be a rock rap star overnight. And long story short is I quit my job. The label was generous enough, the A&R guy, because they connected me with the A&R guy. I'll never forget talking with him at my job, oh my gosh, I've got my own A&R rep, right? And he connected with my manager, got me a booking agent, gets me on the road. Literally within half a year, I am $30,000+ in debt. I'm not really making any money. I'm like really struggling to figure it out. The only way I could make money was playing shows. I'm not selling barely any records. We almost had radio success, but it flopped. And so nothing really happens with this first record. And I'm like going broke. And I'll never forget coming off a tour during Christmas time where I had to pay $150 a night for a 15-minute set. And, you know, they didn't treat me very well. I ended up doing that set where I was performing in between the bands, kind of like the MC of the night, and then I would perform. But as I was performing, the other bands were setting up and sound checking behind me. And so it was really embarrassing, hadn't sold much merch, and I'm literally ready to go back to my job. And I actually did. Like, they gave me like some hours, but they wanted to hire me back full time, and they wanted to pay me more money. And I'll never forget, do I keep chasing this dream, or do I go back to my job that's more secure? And something said, Chris, you don't want to be wondering for the rest of your life, what if, what if, what if? So I passed on the job and I kept pursuing this dream. And now we released album number 2. And I'll never forget it because it was on my birthday that we released this album. And I was in Hot Springs, Arkansas performing. And I remember we did like a in-store signing. So you know, go to the store and your CD's released, it's out. So all these fans are going to come and you're going to sign copies and do an in-store. Nobody showed up. Barely anybody showed up to the show. Maybe 20, 30 people. And I'm away from my hot smoking wife at the time, all right? And I'm just like frustrated. I'm ready to give up. I'm just like, forget this. Why am I doing this? Why am I struggling? And again, I find myself on tour and I get a call from the label. And it wasn't the president, it was the A&R this time. He's like, Chris, I got good news. I'm like, please tell me some good news. I need to hear some good news. He's like, well, you sold 10,000 albums in Japan. We did this small release where they imported 10,000 and those sold out in a week, Chris. And then they're like, so we imported another 10,000 and those sold out in a week. And so now they wanted to do a full Japanese release of your album there in Japan. And I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? And so that breathed new life into my career. All of a sudden, the label is trying to sign me to a full record deal. They also want to do a publishing deal with me all of a sudden because now I'm selling records, right? And something said, you know what, that just doesn't feel right. And I'll never forget being in church, you know, worshiping, praying, listening, and I felt like I had this idea from God. And so I literally drove home as fast as I could, and I started emailing all these booking agents in Japan saying, hey, I'm selling records. Can we do a tour? Can we do some shows? Because I'd gotten good at booking shows and tours. Like, that's how I survived. And within 48 hours, I had an offer to fly my full band out there, get paid, bring my wife, and do this tour in Japan. And what that did is that breathed new life into my career. And so the next 2 records really crushed it in Japan. And that's basically like how I lived off of my music. We finally started to have a little bit of success. But it wasn't until, I think, the 4th or 5th record, we finally had success in Canada. On radio, top 40, finally had success in US, had multiple radio hits. And so I just share this story to say that, like, don't give up. You know, if you're watching this, you're closer to your dream than you think. You miss every shot you don't take. I always like to say in my book, and I share the whole story in my book, is that a fighter isn't someone who never fails. A fighter is someone who never quits. Proverbs 24:16 says, even though a man falls down 7 times, they get up and go again. Okay, and so I want to speak to you out there that to keep going for this dream. I ended up getting all my albums back, and that's how I ended up surviving because, like, you know, the label would take a pretty big chunk, like 70%, but because we sold so many and I owned the publishing, I was able to survive. But now that I own my own masters, I've been independent now since 2014, and I've never looked back. You know, I'm not saying I wouldn't work with the record label, but now what I know as an indie artist, there's no turning back, there's no plan B. I hope this inspired you. I hope you join us at a Spotify 5-day challenge. And definitely, if you want the full story, listen to my book, Fighter: 5 Keys to Conquering Fear. It's on Spotify. Peace.